The autumn breeze swept through the corridors of Westlake High as Yumiko Tanaka clutched her backpack tightly against her chest. Just 3 weeks in America, and already she felt like a fish desperately gasping for air on dry land. The hallways buzzed with loud conversations she could barely understand, punctuated by occasional laughter that made her wonder if she was somehow the subject of their jokes. Yumiko's family had moved from Tokyo after her father received a job transfer. At 15, she had left behind everything familiar, her friends, her favorite ramen shop where the owner always gave her an extra egg, and most painfully, her beloved piano teacher, Ms. Sato, who had guided her fingers across the keys since she was 6 years old. "You will find your music anywhere you go," Ms. Sato had told her on their last day together. "It lives inside you, not in this room." But as Yumiko navigated the maze of unfamiliar faces, those words felt distant and hollow. How could her music survive here, where everything felt so foreign? She checked her schedule again, tracing her finger across the words, "Advanced Music, Room 215. Back in Tokyo, Yumiko had studied at a prestigious music school, often performing in recitals that left audiences breathless. Piano wasn't just something she did, it was who she was. When everything else felt confusing or overwhelming, the black and white keys always made perfect sense to her. Gathering her courage, she pushed open the door to room 215. The music classroom was larger than she expected, with rows of chairs arranged in a semicircle facing a grand piano at the front. Various instruments lined the walls, and posters of famous Western composers watched over the room like stern guardians. A woman in her 50s stood at the center, her graying hair pulled into a tight bun that seemed to pull her facial features into an expression of permanent judgment. She wore a crisp blue blouse with a musical note brooch pinned precisely at her collar. "You must be the new student," the woman said, looking up from her clipboard. "I'm Mrs. Winters." Yumiko bowed slightly, a habit she couldn't shake. "Yes, I'm Yumiko Tanaka. Pleased to meet you." Mrs. Winters raised an eyebrow at the formality and the grammatical error. "Well, take a seat. We're about to begin." Other students filtered in, filling the chairs with casual confidence that Yumiko envied. They seemed so at ease, chatting and laughing, their English flowing effortlessly. A few glanced her way with curious expressions before returning to their conversations. When the bell rang, Mrs. Winters clapped her hands sharply. The room fell silent. "As you know, our spring recital competition is just 2 months away," she announced. "This is the most important event of the year, with representatives from Westland Conservatory in attendance. For seniors, this could mean scholarship opportunities." She paced slowly in front of the students. "This year's theme is Classical Reimagined. You'll select a classical piece and interpret it in a way that showcases both technical mastery and creative understanding. This isn't for beginners or the faint of heart." Her eyes scanned the room, eventually landing on Yumiko. "We have a new student joining our advanced class. Yumiko comes from Japan." 20 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Yumiko felt her cheeks burning. "Perhaps you'd like to tell us about your musical background?" Mrs. Winters asked. Yumiko stood, her legs trembling slightly. I play piano for 9 years. In Tokyo, I study at Sakura Music Academy." "The Sakura Academy?" Mrs. Winters repeated with a hint of skepticism. "And what composers have you studied?" "Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin," Yumiko replied, gaining a bit of confidence when talking about music. "Also Japanese composers like Taki Rentaro." "I see," Mrs. Winters said in a tone that suggested she didn't see it all. "Well, Western classical music requires a particular understanding of its emotional context and historical significance. It's quite different from Eastern approaches." A few students exchanged uncomfortable glances. One boy with curly brown hair frowned slightly at the teacher's words. "Now," Mrs. Winters continued, moving toward the piano, "let's begin with some basic exercises to assess where everyone stands after the break." One by one, students were called to the piano to play scales and short pieces they had prepared. Some played confidently, others nervously. But Mrs. Winters offered specific feedback to each one, mostly focused on technical corrections. When Yumiko's turn came, she approached the piano with a mixture of anxiety and relief. Finally, something familiar in this strange new world. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. The cool ivory beneath her fingertips felt like greeting an old friend. She began with the required C major scale, her fingers moving with practiced precision. "Stop," Mrs. Winters interrupted. Your technique is too rigid. There's no feeling in your playing. Yumiko blinked in confusion. Ms. Sato had always praised her technique. Try again, and remember we're not just pressing keys, we're telling stories. Yumiko started again, trying to inject what she thought Mrs. Winters wanted. This time she added subtle dynamics, letting the scale breathe more naturally. Better, Mrs. Winters conceded without enthusiasm. Now what piece have you prepared? Chopin Nocturne in E-flat major, Yumiko replied. Ambitious, Mrs. Winters remarked with raised eyebrows. Let's hear it. As Yumiko began to play, something magical happened. The classroom disappeared. The judgmental eyes faded away. Even her self-consciousness about her English vanished. There was only the music, the gentle, flowing melody that rose and fell like waves against a shore. She played with her eyes closed, letting her fingers remember the path they had traveled 1,000 times before. The piece spoke of moonlight and whispered secrets, of quiet joy and gentle melancholy. For those few minutes, Yumiko wasn't a foreign girl struggling to fit in. She was just a vessel for something beautiful. When the final notes faded into silence, she opened her eyes, momentarily disoriented, to find herself back in the classroom. A few students were staring with wide eyes. The curly-haired boy had a half-smile on his face. Mrs. Winters cleared her throat. Your technical execution is adequate, but you're interpreting Chopin through an Eastern lens. The emotional nuance is lost in translation. The words hit Yumiko like a physical blow. There's a stiffness in your phrasing that suggests you don't fully grasp the European romantic tradition. Perhaps something simpler would be more appropriate for the recital. A Mozart sonatina, perhaps. A few snickers came from the back of the room. Yumiko's momentary confidence crumbled as quickly as it had formed. I practice more, she managed to say, returning to her seat with burning cheeks. As other students performed, Yumiko tried to make herself as small as possible in her chair. The joy she had briefly felt at the piano was replaced by a hollow ache. Maybe her music couldn't survive here after all. After class, as students filed out, the curly-haired boy approached her. Hey, I'm David, he said with a friendly smile. Your playing was really beautiful. Yumiko looked up, surprised. Thank you. But Mrs. Winters not think so, David shrugged. Don't worry about Mrs. Winters, she's tough on everyone. But she was extra harsh with you, and that wasn't fair. Another student, a girl with bright red hair tied in a ponytail, joined them. Seriously, you play better than half the class. I'm Liz, by the way. Do you want to sit with us at lunch? Before Yumiko could answer, Mrs. Winters called from across the room. David, Elizabeth, don't you have somewhere to be? The two exchanged glances. David whispered quickly, Find us in the cafeteria if you want, before they hurried out. Left alone with Mrs. Winters, Yumiko gathered her things, eager to escape the uncomfortable silence. Miss Tanaka, Mrs. Winters said suddenly, I should inform you that the spring recital has very high standards. Students work years to prepare for this opportunity. Yumiko nodded, not trusting her English to form a proper response. I'm concerned that you may have been placed in this class based on an overestimation of your abilities. Cultural differences in musical education can create these misunderstandings. I work very hard in Tokyo, Yumiko defended quietly. I'm sure you did, but this is America, and our expectations may be different from what you're used to. Perhaps you should consider switching to the intermediate class. The suggestion felt like a demotion, a confirmation of all the inadequacy Yumiko had been feeling since arriving in America. But something in her refused to give up so easily. I stay, she said simply. I practice more. Mrs. Winters pressed her lips into a thin line. As you wish. But don't say I didn't warn you. Walking home that afternoon, Yumiko felt heavier with each step. The maple trees lining the street were beginning to turn golden and red, their leaves occasionally breaking free to dance in the wind before settling on the ground. She wondered if that's what happened to people too, if they held on as long as they could before finally letting go. At home, her mother greeted her with warm questions about her day, but Yumiko offered only vague responses. How could she explain that the one thing she thought would help her belong had instead pushed her further to the margins? That evening after dinner, Yumiko sat at the small digital piano they had brought from Japan. It wasn't the same as the grand piano at school or her old piano in Tokyo, but it was something. She placed her fingers on the keys and began to play the Chopin Nocturne again. Too stiff, she muttered to herself, trying to imagine what Mrs. Winters meant. She played again, attempting to feel the music differently. Again and again she played, sometimes with more rubato, sometimes with different dynamics, but each time, she heard Mrs. Winter's critique in her head. The emotional nuance is lost in translation. Was it possible that music, the universal language she had always believed in, could be misunderstood too? Could her Japanese soul never truly speak through these European compositions? Her father passed by her door, pausing to listen. Beautiful as always, Yumiko. She stopped playing and looked up at him. Papa, do you think I play different? Because I am Japanese? He entered the room and sat beside her on the bench. Music is like water, Yumiko. It takes the shape of whatever vessel holds it. Your experiences, your culture, your heart, these give your music its unique voice. This is not a weakness, but a strength. My teacher not think so, she said quietly. Her father was silent for a moment. Sometimes people fear what they don't understand. But true music crosses all borders. Keep playing your way and eventually they will hear what I hear. Later that night, as Yumiko lay in bed, she made a decision. She would not switch classes. She would not give up. She would practice harder than ever before. And somehow, she would find a way to make Mrs. Winters and everyone else hear the music as she felt it. Not as a foreign thing to be corrected, but as a bridge between worlds. Outside her window, a leaf broke free from its branch, swirling through the night air in a dance all its own. Yumiko watched it until it disappeared from sight, carried by the wind to places unknown, yet moving with undeniable grace. For the next 2 weeks, Yumiko tried her best to become invisible. She arrived at music class just before the bell rang and left as soon as it ended, avoiding the curious glances from her classmates and the critical eye of Mrs. Winters. She chose the seat furthest from the piano during lessons, hoping that if she couldn't be seen, she wouldn't be called upon to play. Despite David and Liz's friendly invitation, Yumiko couldn't bring herself to join them for lunch. The thought of struggling through a conversation in English while they politely pretended not to notice her mistakes was too much to bear. Instead, she ate her carefully packed bento alone in a quiet corner of the courtyard, watching the American students laugh and talk with an ease she envied. At home, Yumiko practiced relentlessly, her fingers moving over the keys of her digital piano until her mother gently reminded her it was past midnight. She played the same Chopin nocturne again and again, trying to hear what Mrs. Winters heard, trying to understand what made her interpretation too Eastern, whatever that meant. One evening, frustrated after hours of practice that felt like getting nowhere, Yumiko slammed her hands down on the keys in a discordant crash that made her mother peek into the room with concern. Yumiko? Everything okay? No, she admitted, feeling tears threatening to spill. I don't know how to play like an American. I don't know how to talk like an American. I don't know how to be like an American. Her mother sat beside her on the piano bench, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Who said you need to be like an American? You are Japanese. Be proud of that. But here, it's like being Japanese is wrong. Her mother was quiet for a moment. When we move to a new place, we bring ourselves with us. Some people will want us to leave parts behind. The strongest people find a way to add new parts without losing who they are. The words stayed with Yumiko as she drifted to sleep that night, but they didn't make facing school any easier. The following day, Mrs. Winters announced that everyone would need to submit their piece selections for the spring recital by the end of the week. Remember, this year's theme is Classical Reimagined. Your selection should demonstrate both technical skill and creative interpretation. As students discussed their choices, Yumiko remained silent. She had been considering a Debussy piece, but after Mrs. Winters' criticism of her Chopin, she wasn't sure anymore. After class, Mrs. Winters called her to the front. Miss Tanaka, have you given any thought to your selection? Perhaps something by Mozart would be appropriate for your level. The suggestion stung. Mozart was what beginners played at recitals in her old school. Yumiko knew she was capable of much more challenging pieces. I think about it, she replied quietly, gathering her books. As she walked through the nearly empty hallways after school, she heard the faint sound of a piano coming from the direction of the auditorium. Curious, she followed the music, drawn to the melancholy jazz tune that seemed to float through the air. Peering through the auditorium door, she saw an older man sitting at the grand piano on stage. He was playing with his eyes closed, his weathered hands moving across the keys with confident grace. The melody was unlike anything Yumiko usually played, free, improvisational, yet deeply emotional. She must have made a sound, because suddenly the man stopped playing and looked up. "Hello there," he called out. "Don't be shy, come on in." Embarrassed at being caught eavesdropping, Yumiko stepped into the auditorium. "Sorry to interrupt. Your playing is very beautiful." The man smiled warmly. "Thank you. Music is meant to be shared, so you're not interrupting at all." He gestured to the seat beside him on the bench. "I'm Mr. Garcia, the school custodian. I am Yumiko Tanaka. New student? From Japan, right? I heard Mrs. Winters mention you." He played a few more chords, his fingers dancing lightly over the keys. "Do you play?" Yumiko nodded. "In Japan, yes, here." She trailed off, not sure how to explain. "Different, huh?" Mr. Garcia seemed to understand without her having to find the words. "Would you like to play something? This old piano doesn't get enough love these days." Hesitantly, Yumiko set her backpack down and took a seat at the bench as Mr. Garcia stood up. She placed her hands on the keys, feeling the familiar comfort of the cool ivory beneath her fingertips. Without thinking too much about it, she began playing the Chopin nocturne that had been haunting her for weeks. As she played, she forgot about Mrs. Winters' criticism, about being the foreign girl, about all the words she couldn't quite pronounce correctly. There was just the music flowing from some deep place inside her, filling the empty auditorium with emotion that needed no translation. When she finished, she was startled to hear enthusiastic applause. Mr. Garcia was beaming at her, his eyes bright with appreciation. "That was magnificent," he exclaimed. "Absolutely beautiful. Your touch, the way you shaped those phrases. You have a gift, young lady." Yumiko blushed, not used to such direct praise. "Thank you. But Mrs. Winters says I play too. Eastern. Not understand Western music properly." Mr. Garcia's smile faded slightly. "Mrs. Winters is an excellent technical teacher, but sometimes she forgets that music isn't just about following rules. It's about speaking from the heart." He sat down next to Yumiko again. "And your heart speaks beautifully through your playing. You were piano teacher?" Yumiko asked, noticing the way his hands naturally rested in a pianist's position. He chuckled. "No, not exactly. I studied at Juilliard many years ago. Had dreams of being a concert pianist. Life had other plans." He shrugged, but without bitterness. "Now I keep the school running smoothly by day and play for myself by night. Why you not perform? You play so well, that's kind of you to say. I still play at a jazz club downtown on weekends. Different from classical, but it feeds my soul." He regarded her thoughtfully. "You know, the auditorium is empty most days after 4 o'clock. If you ever want to practice on a real grand piano instead of those uprights in the music room, you're welcome to use this one." Yumiko's eyes widened. "Really? Is allowed?" "Well, I have the keys," he winked, "and part of my job is making sure the instruments stay in good condition. Being played is good for a piano, keeps it healthy." For the first time since arriving in America, Yumiko felt a genuine smile spread across her face. "Thank you, Mr. Garcia. I would like that very much." And so began a new routine. Each day after school, Yumiko would slip into the auditorium where Mr. Garcia had left the door unlocked for her. Sometimes he would be there, sometimes not. But the magnificent grand piano was always waiting. She would play for an hour or two, working on pieces without the pressure of critical eyes watching her every move. Occasionally, Mr. Garcia would listen and offer gentle suggestions, not about playing more Western, but about bringing out the emotion in the music, about letting the piano breathe, about finding her own voice in the notes written by composers long dead. "Music is like cooking," he told her one afternoon. "The composer gives you the recipe, but how you season it, that's your own special touch. Some like it spicy, some sweet. There's no wrong way if it tastes good to the soul." As the deadline for recital selections approached, Yumiko found herself torn. Part of her wanted to play it safe, to choose something simple that wouldn't draw Mrs. Winters' criticism. But another part, growing stronger each day she practiced in the empty auditorium, wanted to play something that truly expressed how she felt. "What you choose for recital?" she asked Mr. Garcia one day as he was polishing the brass rail in front of the stage. "If I were performing?" He thought for a moment. "I'd choose something that scared me a little. Something just beyond what I thought I could do. That's how we grow." That evening, Yumiko searched through her old sheet music from Japan. At the bottom of the stack, she found a piece she had always loved but never quite mastered, Ravel's Jeu d'eau, a complex, impressionistic work that painted pictures with sound. It was technically challenging, but more importantly, it spoke to something in her that words couldn't express. The next day, she submitted her selection to Mrs. Winters, who raised her eyebrows in surprise. Ravel? That's quite ambitious, Miss Tanaka. This piece requires a sophisticated understanding of French Impressionism. Are you certain you wouldn't prefer something more accessible? I am certain, Yumiko replied, surprising herself with her confidence. Mrs. Winters pressed her lips together. Very well. It's your choice if you want to struggle publicly. As Yumiko turned to go, Mrs. Winters added, By the way, I've noticed you haven't been using the practice rooms after school. You'll need much more practice if you intend to attempt Ravel. Yumiko hesitated, not wanting to reveal her secret sessions in the auditorium. I practice at home, she said simply. That afternoon, when Yumiko arrived at the auditorium, she found it wasn't empty as usual. David, the curly-haired boy from her music class, was sitting in one of the seats, seemingly waiting for someone. When he saw her, he stood up quickly. Hey, Yumiko, I thought I might find you here. She froze, clutching her sheet music to her chest. How did you know I come here? I stayed late for math tutoring yesterday and heard someone playing. Followed the sound. He smiled sheepishly. You're really good, you know. Way better than Mrs. Winters gives you credit for. Yumiko didn't know how to respond to the compliment. Thank you, she said finally. So Ravel for the recital, huh? Bold choice. You think is too difficult? David shook his head. Not for you. I just wish I had your courage. I'm playing it safe with some Bach. They stood in awkward silence for a moment before David spoke again. Listen, a few of us get together on Sundays to practice and give each other feedback. It's more relaxed than class. You should join us. Before Yumiko could respond, the auditorium door opened again and Mr. Garcia appeared, carrying his cleaning supplies. His face brightened when he saw the two students. Ah, making friends, I see. Excellent. David nodded respectfully to the custodian.
Hi, Mr. Garcia. I was just inviting Yumiko to our Sunday practice group.
A wonderful idea. Mr. Garcia approved. Music is better when shared. Yumiko looked between them, feeling something warm and unfamiliar expanding in her chest. It wasn't quite belonging yet, but maybe it was the beginning of finding her place in this strange new world. Yes, she said finally, a small smile forming. I would like to come, as she practiced that afternoon, with David occasionally offering encouraging words and Mr. Garcia bustling about with his cleaning. Yumiko's playing took on a new quality, less restrained, more joyful. The notes of Ravel's Jeu d'eau sparkled like sunlight on water, filling the auditorium with sound that seemed to wash away her fears and doubts, at least for a little while. For the first time since arriving in America, Yumiko began to believe that perhaps Ms. Sato had been right after all. Perhaps she could find her music anywhere, because it lived inside her, waiting patiently to be heard. Sunday afternoon arrived with golden autumn sunshine streaming through the trees. Yumiko stood nervously on the porch of David's house, checking the address on her phone one more time before gathering the courage to ring the doorbell. She had changed outfits 3 times before leaving home, wanting to look nice but not like she was trying too hard. She finally settled on a simple blue sweater and jeans with her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. The door swung open to reveal David's smiling face. You made it, come on in. Everyone's in the basement. Yumiko followed him through a cozy living room where family photos lined the walls. The house smelled like cinnamon and something baking. It reminded her of her grandmother's kitchen back in Japan, though the scents were different. Mom's making apple pie, David explained, catching her sniffing the air appreciatively. She always bakes when we have our music sessions. Says it's her contribution to the arts. The basement had been converted into a music room, with sound-dampening panels on the walls, a well-used upright piano in the corner, and various other instruments scattered about. 3 other students from their music class were already there. Liz with her bright red ponytail, a tall boy with glasses who introduced himself as Thomas, and a quiet girl named Nadia who gave Yumiko a shy wave. Guys, this is Yumiko, David announced. She's playing Ravel for the recital. Whoa, Jeu d'eau. Thomas adjusted his glasses. That's ambitious, Mrs. Winters must love you, Liz snorted. Mrs. Winters doesn't love anyone except maybe Beethoven, and he's been dead for 2 centuries. She turned to Yumiko with a friendly smile. Don't mind Thomas. He thinks anything written after 1800 is too modern. I do not, Thomas protested. I just appreciate the classical structures. Anyway, David interrupted what seemed like a familiar argument. We usually take turns playing our pieces, then give each other feedback. It's more helpful than Mrs. Winters' criticism because we actually want each other to succeed. Not like Mrs. Winters, who acts like we're all competing for a single spot at Juilliard, Nadia added quietly. Yumiko felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought of playing for this group. It was one thing to practice alone in the auditorium or with only Mr. Garcia listening, but quite another to perform for peers who might judge her. David must have noticed her hesitation. You don't have to play today if you don't want to. You can just listen. But Yumiko thought of Mr. Garcia's words about growing by doing things that scared you a little. No, I will play. But maybe. Not first? I'll go, Liz volunteered, pulling out her violin case. I'm doing the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto. Well, just part of it, obviously. As Liz played, Yumiko was struck by her passionate style. She attacked the notes with confidence, her body swaying with the music. It wasn't technically perfect. There were a few intonation issues in the high passages. But the emotional impact was undeniable. When she finished, everyone clapped enthusiastically. The run in the third section still needs work, Thomas said. But the cadenza was much improved from last week. Yeah, and your tone in the lower register is getting richer, David added. My only suggestion would be to take a little more time with the lyrical sections. It feels a bit rushed. Liz nodded thoughtfully. I always get excited and push the tempo. I'll work on that. Yumiko was surprised by the constructive, specific feedback. In Japan, her teachers had been strict, pointing out every flaw. But her peers rarely commented on each other's playing so directly. Thomas went next with a Bach prelude and fugue, his fingers moving with mathematical precision over the keys. Then Nadia sang an aria from La Bohème, her voice surprisingly powerful for someone so quiet in conversation. David played a Schubert impromptu, infusing it with a warmth that made Yumiko think of the apple pie baking upstairs. Finally, it was her turn. She sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and began the rippling arpeggios that opened Ravel's Jeu d'eau. She tried to picture water, a fountain sparkling in the sun, droplets catching the light as they fell. The continuous flow and movement, captured in sound. She was so absorbed in the music that she almost forgot she had an audience until she played the final shimmering chord and looked up to see 4 stunned faces staring back at her. Holy crap. Liz breathed. That was... Thomas seemed at a loss for words, a rarity according to his friend's surprised glances. Incredible, David finished for him. Yumiko, that was absolutely beautiful. Nadia nodded enthusiastically. The way you played those impressionistic harmonies. It was like I could actually see the water. Yumiko felt her cheeks grow warm with the praise. Thank you. Still need work on middle section. Some wrong notes. Who cares about a few wrong notes? Liz exclaimed. The feeling was perfect. Mrs. Winters is crazy if she doesn't recognize how talented you are. The basement door opened, and David's mother appeared with a tray of apple pie and ice cream. Thought you musicians might need some fuel, she said with a smile. I could hear that last piece from upstairs. Absolutely lovely. As they ate pie and talked about music, Yumiko felt something shift inside her. For the first time since coming to America, she wasn't constantly thinking about her accent or choosing her words carefully or feeling like an outsider. She was just a pianist among other musicians, speaking the universal language they all understood. You should join us every week, Thomas said, helping himself to a second piece of pie. Your playing will elevate everyone's game. Yeah, if Mrs. Winters doesn't steal you for her advanced class, Liz joked. Nadia, who had been quiet for a while, suddenly spoke up. Speaking of Mrs. Winters, did you guys hear what she said about the recital judges? No, what? David asked. Apparently one of them is from the Westland Conservatory, that fancy music school downtown. They're specifically looking for students to award scholarships to. No way. Liz nearly spilled her ice cream. That changes everything. I need to practice twice as hard now. Thomas adjusted his glasses nervously. The Westland Conservatory? Their standards are extremely high. Yumiko listened to their excited chatter, a new worry forming in her mind. If the stakes for the recital were higher than she realized, Mrs. Winters would probably scrutinize her performance even more severely. As if reading her thoughts, David leaned over and whispered, "Don't worry about Mrs. Winters, just play like you did today, and you'll blow everyone away, judges included." The next day at school, Yumiko felt a new confidence as she walked into music class. The friendly faces of David, Liz, Thomas, and Nadia greeted her, no longer strangers but allies in this strange new world. Mrs. Winters was writing on the board when Yumiko entered. She turned and raised an eyebrow. "Miss Tanaka, I hope you've been practicing your Ravel. It's an extremely challenging piece that many professionals struggle with." "Yes, I practice," Yumiko replied simply. "Well, we'll see. Today I want to hear everyone's progress on their recital pieces. We'll go in alphabetical order, which means..." She consulted her list. "Thomas, you're first with Bach." One by one, students performed portions of their selected pieces. Mrs. Winters offered critiques that ranged from mildly disapproving to scathingly critical. When it was David's turn, she interrupted his Schubert after only 30 seconds. "Mr. Chen, you're playing Schubert as if he were Chopin. The romantics are distinct for a reason. Try again with less rubato." David tried again, this time with a more straightforward interpretation, but Mrs. Winters still seemed dissatisfied. Better, but still too indulgent. Schubert requires discipline. When Liz played her violin piece, Mrs. Winters focused on every technical flaw, barely mentioning the passionate musicality that had made her performance so moving at David's house. Finally, it was Yumiko's turn. She approached the piano with her heart pounding but her resolve firm. She had played this piece for her new friends. She could play it for Mrs. Winters, too. The opening arpeggios flowed from her fingers like water from a fountain. She tried to lose herself in the music as she had done in David's basement, but Mrs. Winters' critical gaze made it difficult to forget she was being judged. "Stop," Mrs. Winters said after the first page. "Your interpretation is unconventional." Yumiko's fingers froze over the keys. Ravel was very specific about his markings. "You're taking liberties with the tempo and dynamics that distort his intentions, and your technique in the runs lacks clarity." "But..." Yumiko started to object, then caught herself. "But what, Miss Tanaka?" Gathering her courage, Yumiko continued. "I think Ravel wanted to sound like water. Not just notes on page. Water moves in different ways." Mrs. Winters' eyebrows shot up. "I see. And you believe you understand Ravel's intentions better than musicologists who have studied his work for decades?" Yumiko felt her face burning, but something made her stand her ground. "Not better. Different, maybe." A few students exchanged glances, surprised by her boldness. "Different is not always better, Miss Tanaka, especially when different means ignoring the composer's explicit instructions. Perhaps you should reconsider your selection. The recital is only 6 weeks away, and this piece is clearly beyond your current understanding." The dismissal stung, but Yumiko remembered how her friends had reacted to her playing. They had seen something valuable in her interpretation, even with its imperfections. "I will continue with Ravel," she said firmly. Mrs. Winters' lips thinned. "As you wish. But don't say I didn't warn you when the judges are unimpressed by your creative approach." After class, Mrs. Winters asked Yumiko to stay behind. With the room empty, her tone became less harsh but more condescending. "Miss Tanaka, I understand that in Japan you may have been taught different interpretative approaches, but here in America we respect the Western classical tradition as it was intended. The spring recital isn't just about playing notes. It's about demonstrating a true understanding of the European musical heritage." "Music is universal language," Yumiko replied, remembering Mr. Garcia's words. "It speaks from heart, not just from tradition." Mrs. Winters sighed as if Yumiko was being deliberately difficult. "That's a lovely sentiment, but in the real world of classical music performance there are standards. The judges at the recital will be looking for those standards. I'm trying to help you avoid embarrassment." "I understand. May I go now?" As Yumiko walked to her next class, she felt torn. Part of her wanted to please Mrs. Winters, to conform to the standards she kept mentioning. It would certainly be easier. But another part, the part that came alive when her fingers touched the piano keys, refused to be constrained by someone else's idea of how music should sound. That afternoon, she went to the auditorium as usual. Mr. Garcia was polishing the wooden stage floor but paused when she entered. Ah, Yumiko. How was your Sunday practice group? Good, very good. But today in class, she sighed, sitting heavily on the piano bench. Mrs. Winters being Mrs. Winters? He guessed with a sympathetic smile. She says my playing is wrong, not following tradition correctly. Maybe she is right. Maybe I should choose easier piece. Mr. Garcia set down his polishing cloth and came to sit beside her. Let me tell you something about tradition. The great composers we revere now, Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin, they were all innovators in their time. They broke rules. They followed their own vision. That's why their music endures. But Mrs. Winters says, Mrs. Winters has spent her life studying how other people interpret music. There's value in that knowledge. But there's also value in finding your own voice. He gestured to the piano. Play your Ravel for me. Play it the way you feel it, not the way she tells you to feel it. Yumiko positioned her hands over the keys and began to play. This time she didn't think about Mrs. Winters or judges or scholarships. She thought about water, the gentle brooks in the park near her home in Tokyo, the fountain in the town square here in America, the rainfall that sounded the same in both countries. When she finished, Mr. Garcia was nodding slowly, a smile spreading across his face. That's it. That's the magic. You know what your challenge is now? What? To play exactly like that when Mrs. Winters is watching. To believe in your interpretation so completely that her disapproval can't touch it. Yumiko considered this. It seemed impossible to ignore Mrs. Winters's critical gaze. But maybe with enough practice, with enough conviction. I will try, she promised, both to Mr. Garcia and to herself. I will play my way, even when she is watching. The weeks leading up to the recital passed in a blur of classes, practice sessions, and sleepless nights. Yumiko divided her time between the Sunday gatherings at David's house, her secret practice sessions with Mr. Garcia in the auditorium, and countless hours at her digital piano at home. Her fingers developed calluses, and sometimes she woke up in the morning still moving them in her sleep, playing phantom passages from Ravel's challenging piece. Each day in music class, Mrs. Winters found new ways to highlight what she considered flaws in Yumiko's playing. Too forceful in the fortissimo sections. Not enough clarity in the arpeggios. The pedaling is excessive. And always, always. Your interpretation lacks an understanding of the European tradition. But with each criticism, instead of shrinking further into herself as she once might have done, Yumiko grew more determined. She took note of the technical suggestions that made sense to her and respectfully ignored the ones that would have stripped her playing of its distinctive voice. Her English was improving too, thanks to the hours spent with David, Liz, Thomas, and Nadia. They had taken to gathering in the cafeteria at lunch where conversation flowed between music, school gossip, and plans for the weekend. Sometimes they would lapse into discussions so rapid that Yumiko couldn't follow. But they always made an effort to include her, slowing down or explaining American slang that confused her. You know, Liz said one day as they sat together. Mrs. Winters has always been tough, but she seems extra hard on you, Yumiko. It's not fair. Maybe she feels threatened, Thomas suggested, adjusting his glasses. Your playing is more interesting than what she's used to. Or maybe she's just a music snob, David added. She thinks there's only one right way to play classical music, and it happens to be her way. Yumiko appreciated their support, but tried to be fair. She knows much about music. Many years of study. I can learn from her, even if she not like my style. That's very mature of you, Nadia said quietly. I don't think I could be so gracious if my teacher criticized me like that. The conversation was interrupted when a tall boy named Ryan, known for being Mrs. Winters' favorite student, approached their table with a smirk. Hey, Tanaka, he said, deliberately mispronouncing her name. Heard you're doing Ravel for the recital. Bold choice for someone who can't even say rhythm correctly. Yumiko felt her cheeks burn, but before she could respond, David stood up. Back off, Ryan. At least Yumiko plays with actual feeling, not like a robot following a program. Whatever, Ryan scoffed. The judges want precision and proper interpretation, not some exotic Eastern take on Western classics. But good luck, you'll need it. He walked away with a dismissive laugh. Ignore him, Liz said, squeezing Yumiko's hand. He's just scared because you're better than him. Am I? Yumiko wasn't so sure. Ryan had been playing piano since he was 3, and had won several regional competitions. His technique was flawless, and he always played exactly as Mrs. Winters instructed. Different kind of better, David explained. He plays all the right notes at all the right times, but you make people feel something. That's rarer. That afternoon in the auditorium, Yumiko confided her doubts to Mr. Garcia. Maybe Ryan is right. Maybe judges want traditional playing, not my style. Mr. Garcia, who was replacing a burned-out spotlight, climbed down from his ladder with a thoughtful expression. Let me tell you something about judges, Yumiko. I've been around music competitions for 40 years. Seen all kinds of performers, all kinds of judges. He sat on the edge of the stage, wiping his hands on a rag. The mediocre players, they're a dime a dozen. Every competition has 20 kids who can play the notes correctly. But the ones who stand out, the ones who make the judges put down their pens and really listen, those are the musicians who bring something unique to the music. But what if unique is wrong? Music isn't math. There's no single right answer. When Claude Debussy was at the Paris Conservatory, his teachers thought his harmonies were wrong. Now we study those same harmonies as revolutionary. He smiled at her. Sometimes today's wrong is tomorrow's groundbreaking. Yumiko nodded, wanting to believe him. 2 weeks until recital. Not much time to get better. You don't need to get better, Mr. Garcia said firmly. You need to get more confident. Play like you played just now. Like you have nothing to lose and everything to share. That evening, Yumiko's mother noticed her distraction at dinner. Everything okay at school, Yumiko? Just thinking about the recital, she replied, pushing rice around her plate. Are you nervous? Her father asked. Yes, no. I don't know. She set down her chopsticks. I love how I play this piece, but my teacher doesn't. She thinks it's wrong because it's different. Too Japanese, maybe. Her parents exchanged a look. May we hear it? Her mother asked. We haven't heard you play this new piece yet. After dinner, Yumiko sat at her digital piano while her parents settled on the couch. She took a deep breath and began to play, trying to create the sounds of flowing water despite the limitations of the electronic instrument. When she finished, she looked up nervously. Her father's eyes were closed and her mother was wiping away a tear. Yumiko, her father said, finally opening his eyes. That was beautiful. Not Japanese, not American, just beautiful. Her mother nodded in agreement. If your teacher cannot hear that beauty, that is her loss, not yours. Yumiko felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Her parents' simple approval meant more than she had realized. The next day, as Yumiko was practicing in the auditorium, the door opened to reveal not Mr. Garcia, but Mrs. Winters. The teacher stood in the doorway for a moment, her expression unreadable, then walked briskly toward the stage. Miss Tanaka, so this is where you've been hiding to practice. Yumiko's hands froze on the keys. Mr. Garcia said I could use this piano for practice. I see. Mrs. Winters looked around the empty auditorium. And where is Mr. Garcia now? Cleaning gym, I think. Yumiko felt suddenly protective of the kind custodian, worried that he might get in trouble for allowing her to use the auditorium. Mrs. Winters nodded slowly, then surprised Yumiko by sitting on the bench beside her. Play it again. From the beginning. Heart-pounding, Yumiko positioned her hands and began the piece. She tried to ignore the critical presence beside her, to lose herself in the music as she usually did, but it was difficult with Mrs. Winters watching her every move. After a few minutes, Mrs. Winters held up a hand. Stop, please. Yumiko braced herself for criticism, but Mrs. Winters' expression wasn't as harsh as usual. Instead, she looked almost curious. Your interpretation is highly unusual, she said finally. The rubato in the middle section, the emphasis on certain harmonies that most pianists treat as transitional. It's not how Ravel is typically played. I know, Yumiko said quietly. You tell me many times. Yes, well. Mrs. Winters seemed to be choosing her words carefully. The question is whether the judges will appreciate such an unconventional approach. The Westland Conservatory is very traditional in its teaching methods. I can only play how I feel the music. Yumiko said simply. If judges not like, then maybe Westland not right place for me. Mrs. Winters looked surprised, then almost amused. That's a rather bold attitude for someone your age. Not bold. Just true. Yumiko gathered her courage. Music must come from heart, not just from rules. Rules exist for a reason, Miss Tanaka. They provide a framework for understanding a composer's intentions. Yes, but composers also break rules, make new ones, push boundaries. Mrs. Winters was silent for a moment, studying Yumiko with new interest. You've been talking to Mr. Garcia, haven't you? That sounds like something he would say. Yumiko nodded, not wanting to get him in trouble but unwilling to lie. Joseph Garcia could have been a concert pianist, you know, Mrs. Winters said unexpectedly. We studied at Juilliard together many years ago. He had a similar philosophy about music. This revelation startled Yumiko. She couldn't imagine Mrs. Winters as a student, young and perhaps passionate about music in the same way she was now. What happened? Why he not become pianist? A shadow crossed Mrs. Winters' face. Life happened. Choices were made. She stood up abruptly. The point is, Miss Tanaka, that in the real world of classical music there are expectations, conventions. The judges at the recital will have those expectations. And if I not meet them, then you will likely not receive the scholarship, regardless of your technical abilities. Mrs. Winters gathered her scarf. Just something to consider with the recital so close. Good day, Miss Tanaka. She walked away, her heels clicking on the auditorium floor, leaving Yumiko confused and troubled. That Sunday at David's house, Yumiko recounted the strange encounter to her friends. They were sprawled around the basement after their practice session, eating Mrs. Chen's homemade cookies and discussing the upcoming recital. Wait, Mrs. Winters and Mr. Garcia knew each other at Juilliard? Liz exclaimed. Plot twist. Maybe that explains why she's so rigid about rules, Thomas mused. Maybe she's afraid of what happens when you break them. Or maybe she's jealous, David suggested. Mr. Garcia might not be a famous pianist, but he still plays with joy. When was the last time anyone saw Mrs. Winters actually enjoy music? Nadia, who had been quiet as usual, suddenly spoke up. I think you should play it your way, Yumiko. Even if it costs you the scholarship. Everyone looked at her surprised. Why? Yumiko asked. Because 20 years from now, what will matter more? That you got a scholarship by playing it safe? Or that you were true to your own artistic voice? Nadia blushed, not used to being the center of attention. At least that's what I think. Yumiko considered this. The scholarship would certainly make her parents' lives easier. They had sacrificed so much to move to America for her father's job. Winning would be a way to repay them, to justify the upheaval in all their lives. But then she remembered her parents' faces after she played for them, her father's closed eyes, her mother's tears. They hadn't cared about scholarships or judges or traditional interpretations. They had simply heard the beauty in her playing and been moved by it. I decide, Yumiko said finally. I play my way even if judges not approve. Music should be honest, or why play at all? Her friends nodded in agreement, and in that moment, surrounded by their support, the recital seemed less frightening. Whatever happened on stage, she would be playing her truth. Not Mrs. Winters, not the judges, but her own. The day of the spring recital arrived with a sky so blue it hurt to look at it. Yumiko stood at her bedroom window, watching the cherry tree in their front yard sway in the gentle breeze. It reminded her of the sakura trees in Tokyo that would be blooming right now, thousands of miles away. For a moment she felt a pang of homesickness so sharp it took her breath away. Yumiko? Her mother's soft voice came from the doorway. Are you ready? We should leave soon. Yumiko turned from the window. She was wearing a simple dark blue dress that they had chosen together for the occasion, with her hair pulled back in a neat bun. On her wrist was a delicate silver bracelet that had belonged to her grandmother, a small piece of home to carry with her onto the stage. Yes, I'm ready, she replied, though her racing heart suggested otherwise. Her father was waiting by the front door, camera in hand. My star pianist, he said with a proud smile. No matter what happens today, remember that we are already so proud of you. The ride to school was quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Yumiko kept her hands in her lap, occasionally moving her fingers as if playing invisible keys, going over the more difficult passages of Ravel's piece in her mind when they arrived at the school auditorium, the same one where she had practiced so many afternoons with Mr. Garcia. It was already buzzing with activity. Students in formal attire were gathering in the wings. Parents were finding seats, and Mrs. Winters was rushing about with a clipboard, looking more stressed than usual. Performers check in at the table by the stage door, she announced, spotting Yumiko. Parents, please take your seats in the auditorium. We'll begin precisely at 1 o'clock. Yumiko hugged her parents and made her way to the check-in table, where Liz was already waiting. There you are, Liz exclaimed, her red hair neatly styled for once. How are you feeling? Ready to blow everyone away? Nervous, Yumiko admitted. Many butterflies in stomach. Me too. I think I'm going to throw up or faint. Maybe both. Despite her words, Liz was grinning with excitement. Oh, look. The judges are here. She nodded toward a group of serious-looking adults being escorted to a special seating area. One older woman with silver hair seemed particularly intimidating, her posture rigidly straight as she examined the program with a critical eye. That's Dr. Eleanor White, the head of piano at Westland Conservatory, Thomas whispered, joining them. She's a legend. They say she once made a graduate student cry just by raising an eyebrow during his recital. Not helping. Thomas, David said, appearing behind them in a slightly too large suit that suggested it was borrowed or a hand-me-down. He turned to Yumiko with a reassuring smile. Just play like you did at my house last week. Forget the judges, forget Mrs. Winters, just find the music. Backstage became increasingly chaotic as more performers arrived. Mrs. Winters gathered them all for last-minute instructions, going over the order of performances and reminding them about stage etiquette. Remember, she said, her voice tense, you are not just representing yourselves today, but our school's music program. The judges will be evaluating both technical proficiency and artistic interpretation. Her eyes lingered on Yumiko for a moment. Stick to what we've practiced. Ryan, who would be playing last as the senior student, smirked in Yumiko's direction. Don't worry about the scholarship, he said quietly as they dispersed. No one expects the new girl to win anyway. Before Yumiko could respond, she felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Mr. Garcia, dressed not in his usual work clothes but in a neat suit, his silver hair combed back. Mr. Garcia, she exclaimed. You look different, he chuckled. Can't be the guy with the mop today. I'm here as a music lover, not a custodian. He leaned closer, speaking softly. How are you feeling? Scared, she admitted. Important people watching. Judges from conservatory. Listen to me, Yumiko. When you get out there, there's a moment, just before you start playing, when everything gets quiet. The audience, the judges, even the air itself seems to hold its breath. In that moment, forget everything except the music. Let it flow through you like water. Can you do that? Yumiko nodded, drawing strength from his confidence in her. Good girl. I'll be right there in the 4th row. If you get nervous, find me. I'll be the one grinning like a fool, proud as can be. His words warmed her, and as he walked away to take his seat, Yumiko felt slightly calmer. She found a quiet corner backstage to close her eyes and center herself, visualizing the music flowing from her heart through her arms to her fingertips. The recital began. From backstage, Yumiko could hear the muted sounds of performances, Nadia's clear soprano, Thomas's precise Bach, the warm tones of Liz's violin. Each was followed by polite applause. Occasionally, she would peek through the curtain to gauge the judges' reactions, but their faces remained impassive, giving nothing away. David went just before her. His Schubert was more confident than she had ever heard him play it, with a warmth that seemed to reach every corner of the auditorium. When he finished, the applause was enthusiastic. He gave a quick bow and hurried off stage, giving Yumiko a thumbs up as they passed each other. And now, came Mrs. Winters' voice from the stage, Yumiko Tanaka, performing Maurice Ravel's Judo. Yumiko walked onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinding her. She bowed to the audience, then to the judges, and took her seat at the grand piano. The same piano where she had practiced so often, yet it felt different now with hundreds of eyes watching her. She placed her hands on the keys and hesitated, a sudden wave of doubt washing over her. What if Mrs. Winters was right? What if her interpretation was too different, too personal? What if the judges hated it? Then she remembered Mr. Garcia's words about the moment of silence. She took a deep breath and looked out at the audience. In the dimness beyond the stage lights, she could just make out her parents sitting together, her mother clutching her father's arm. A few rows behind them was Mr. Garcia, giving her an encouraging nod. And scattered throughout were David, Liz, Thomas, and Nadia, her new friends who had accepted her playing without question. In that moment, Yumiko realized something important. Whether or not she won the scholarship, whether or not the judges approved of her playing, she had already found her place in this new world. She had found people who heard the music as she did, not as a set of rules to be followed, but as a living, breathing thing that spoke from one heart to another. With that thought, she began to play. The opening arpeggios rippled from her fingers like water catching sunlight, each note distinct yet flowing into the next. As she moved into the main theme, she thought of the fountain in the park where her grandmother used to take her, the way the water danced and sparkled, now gentle, now playful, now surging with unexpected power. She forgot about the judges, forgot about Mrs. Winters, forgot about everything except the story she was telling through her fingers. The middle section bloomed with color and emotion, her body swaying slightly as she leaned into the music, letting it carry her where it wanted to go. When she reached the final delicate passages, time seemed to suspend. The last notes shimmered in the air and gradually faded into silence. For a heartbeat, the audience was completely still. Then the applause began, tentative at first, then growing stronger. Yumiko stood and bowed, her heart pounding. As she looked up, she caught sight of the silver-haired judge from Westland Conservatory. The woman's stern face had softened and she was nodding slightly, the closest thing to approval she had shown all afternoon. Mrs. Winters was waiting in the wings, her expression unreadable. "That was not what we practiced," she said quietly. "No," Yumiko agreed. "It was better." To her surprise, a small smile tugged at the corner of Mrs. Winters' mouth. "Perhaps," she conceded. "Go sit with your parents now. Ryan is our final performer." Ryan's performance was technically flawless, his fingers flying over the keys with precision, every note exactly as written. The audience applauded enthusiastically, and Mrs. Winters beamed with pride as her star pupil took his bow. After the final performance, the judges withdrew to deliberate while refreshments were served in the lobby. Yumiko found herself surrounded by her friends and family, all talking excitedly about the performances. "You were incredible," David said, his eyes shining. "I've never heard Ravel played like that." "The judges were definitely paying attention," Liz added. "Even Dr. White looked impressed, and nothing impresses her." Yumiko's parents hugged her tightly. "So beautiful," her mother whispered. Like water singing, Mr. Garcia made his way through the crowd to congratulate her. "That's what I'm talking about," he said with a grin. "You found your voice, kid. No matter what happens next, remember how that felt." After what seemed like hours, a bell rang, signaling that the judges had reached their decisions. Everyone filed back into the auditorium, the performers sitting together in the front row. The silver-haired Dr. White stepped up to the microphone. "On behalf of Westland Conservatory, I'd like to thank all of today's performers for sharing their talents with us." The level of musicianship was impressive. She went through several awards for different age groups and instruments. Thomas received an honorable mention for his Bach. Liz won second place in the strings category. Ryan sat confidently, clearly expecting to hear his name called for the piano scholarship. "And now," Dr. White continued, "the Westland Conservatory Piano Scholarship, which includes full tuition for our summer intensive program." Yumiko held her breath, not daring to hope. This award goes to a young musician who demonstrated not only technical skill, but also a rare ability to find new meaning in a familiar piece, to make us hear it as if for the first time. Dr. White paused, looking directly at Yumiko. "Yumiko Tanaka for her performance of Ravel's Judo." The auditorium erupted in applause. David and Liz were on their feet cheering. Ryan's face had gone pale with shock. Mrs. Winters looked surprised but not displeased. As Yumiko made her way to the stage to accept the certificate, she caught sight of Mr. Garcia in the audience. He was wiping away a tear, his face lit with pride. And beside him, surprisingly, was Mrs. Winters, nodding with what looked almost like respect. In that moment, standing on the stage with the scholarship in her hands and the applause washing over her like waves, Yumiko knew that she had found her voice, not Japanese, not American, but uniquely her own. And for the first time since arriving in this new country, she felt not like a visitor or an outsider, but like someone who truly belonged.